In the first week of October, we marked the Day of Koreans, which was introduced in 2007 by South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to celebrate the 7.5 million overseas Koreans, protect their rights and interests in their residing countries, and also support their efforts to live as exemplary citizens in their respective societies. Today, we speak with two people with Korean backgrounds who have been at the forefront of these efforts, helping their local Korean communities overseas and serving as an inspiration to immigrants everywhere. Bora Kwon is a London-based politician, the local councillor of Hammersmith and Fulham Council in London, who became the UK's first British Korean to become involved in politics 2 years ago. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's lovely to see you. And we also connect with John Sa, California-based former CEO of LegalZoom, who is known as a serial entrepreneur, taking multiple businesses from startup to valuations of more than $2 billion, and named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2016 for his efforts. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's do ladies first. So, Bora, you were the first British Korean to make it into the UK's political system. And, well, first of all, how did you get involved in the Labour Party, and what does your role as local councillor involve?
Thank you. So I was elected as a councillor 2 years ago in 2018, and I was actually born in South Korea, but I've lived in the UK for since I was 3 years old. And I actually got involved in politics quite late in life, like sort of in my mid-30s. And the reason I got involved was actually through some local campaigns. I live in Hammersmith, which is the area that I'm involved in, and that we had some issues with local health issues and the political scene at the time. It was just very much something I wanted to get involved in. So I didn't have a plan for it. I got a lot of encouragement from the people that I was working with and campaigning with, and the area of London that I live in is very, very diverse. So I think the idea of having a more representative political candidates, so people from East Asia, was something that was really warmly welcomed when I decided to stand.
So what were the last 2 years as councillor really like for you as a British Korean? I mean, especially at a time when right-wing nationalism is on the rise. I mean, what have been the challenges of integrating minorities, including Koreans, of course, and really making their voices heard in a society as diverse as the UK's?
I think the Korean community in the UK, it's actually quite different from the Korean community, for example, in the US, which is, I think, what we're more familiar with, because we're a lot smaller. So I believe there's up to around 40,000 Koreans in the UK, but a large percentage of that are actually students who are sort of quite transient. So in terms of immigrant culture, like myself and my family and my friends in the UK, we're still quite small. And I mean, really, since the 1980s, I think, where there was an increase, it hasn't sort of grown sort of very much. So in terms of representation, there aren't a lot of Korean British people on the public scene. So although it feels quite surprising to me that in a diverse city like the UK and London, there haven't been more East Asians involved in politics, I think that will probably change quite rapidly in the next 5 to 10 years. But at the moment, I'm very lucky and honoured to be, one of the first. The last couple of years in the UK politically has been incredibly eventful, I think is probably one word to describe it. We had just after, in 2016, we had the Brexit vote, which was sort of plunged the country into a lot of political turmoil over the last few years. And then on top of that, obviously, in the last year, we've had, well, not the last year, the last 6 months, really, we've had to be dealing with the coronavirus. And it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the next sort of couple of weeks, let alone what's going to happen sort of 6 months from now. So things feel sort of quite unstable, but the British public are quite a resilient kind of people. So we're weathering the storms, but yes, it's definitely not a calm period.
Right. Well, now let's get to you, John. So you are really known as the disruptor of legal services, as the former CEO of LegalZoom, which is a company that integrates, attorneys and technology to produce services that really help small business owners and families, especially. And you're also part of the network of Korean American leaders. How have you been really helping and engaging with those in the Korean community?
Well, I think at a personal level, I mentor a lot of young entrepreneurs, many of them Korean. And I hope I do that half as well as the many mentors that have helped me along the way. I think institutionally, I've spent most of my life, kind of college and post, helping out with leadership within the community, and organized CASCON as a conference, and then set up a foundation to help support the students and activities, and then became a NetCal fellow, and then a NetCal board of director, where we would train young professionals in leadership. Really on the thesis that leadership is a skill like any other. You take some natural ability and you hone it through practice and training and education. And so we've set up various leadership programs around the country, and actually have a program here in Seoul.
And the US, of course, is a land of immigrants, and they're all reaching for that American dream. And it seems quite fair to say that, well, with your academic and professional accomplishments, you're an inspiration for immigrants there everywhere. I mean, do you feel that the perception has changed in the business world due to the growing number of South Korean entrepreneurs and executives like yourselves?
I would say so. I think when I was younger, and I was one of the first generation of Korean Americans born in the US, when I was younger, people didn't know what the difference between Koreans or Chinese or Japanese. And I think now, with greater numbers comes greater face-to-face contact and relationships. And there's an understanding and appreciation for Korean tenacity, creativity, I think, and entrepreneurship. In fact, at LegalZoom, we've helped incorporate over 1 million small businesses in the US. And we did a study, and if you were born outside of the United States, you're 300% more likely to start a business than someone born inside the United States. And of the 100 nationalities, when we trace by country of origin, who's the most entrepreneurial? Koreans were near the top of that list, actually number 2. We would have been about 0.2% off from the top, but of most likely to own their own small business. So I think the reputation for Koreans as entrepreneurs, both in small business and in big business, is growing dramatically.
Right. Well, over in the UK as well, Bora, do you think with the current popularity of things like K-pop and most recently South Korea's COVID-19 response model having gained quite a lot of global attention, do you feel that the greater British public as well, they're becoming more aware or even appreciative of the Korean community there and the South Korean culture?
Oh, definitely. So I've been in the UK since 1982, and like Mr. Sar mentioned, growing up, I often got asked, are you Japanese or are you Chinese? And Korea as a country was so little known amongst the general public. And then a few sort of milestone events in my history growing up started to increase the knowledge and visibility of Korea, for the UK public. So the 1988 Olympics was really a turning point. Korea reaching the quarterfinals of the World Cup, I think in 2002. So all of these events happened, and then in the last, knowledge has really accelerated in the last I'd say 5 years. So on the business front, I think the popularity of Samsung Electronics as a sort of global household name, particularly in sort of mobile phone technology, people have started to, for a long time, I think people didn't realize in the UK that Samsung was a Korean company. They definitely do now. And then we started to get a few Korean footballers in the Premier League teams. And then this year, obviously, with the win of Parasite at the Oscars, that was a huge defining moment. And yes, I think K-pop BTS, when they have played UK venues such as the O2 Arena and Wembley Arena, they've sold out. So that was slightly slightly more of an underground movement initially, but they seem to be, I think, now very much in the mainstream. So I think for a Korean like myself, these sort of cultural events are just as important as sort of business, economic or political events in increasing the knowledge and visibility of Korea amongst the UK population.
Right, so there were quite a number of high-profile milestones there, but what local efforts do you think have been made by the Korean community there in the UK to really change public perception and awareness of South Korea?
I think the Korean community in the UK are really well integrated with their local community. As I said, it is very small. We have what's unofficially known a little bit as a Koreatown in southwest London, a town called New Malden, which is where my family and some of my friends grew up. And there's quite a lot of Korean small businesses there. And in that area, if you walk down a high street, the sort of main drag of the town, you'll see lots of Korean businesses. You'll see Korean writing and things, you know, on the placards outside the shops and so on. Again, it's not something that I could have imagined as a child in the 80s. In terms of visibility, but we have Korean churches, we have, as you know, Korean businesses, and online as well. I think the presence is growing because of Korea's reputation as a technology leader. Everyone, again, it's been well written about, but also I think the kind of professions that young Korean people in the UK tend to go into, we have a sort of strong background, people going into science, technology, medicine and so on. And hopefully that will expand in the future to things like entertainment, media and politics.
And John, you're a California native, and well, how has the Korean community there changed since your childhood years? I mean, would you say it's more open and also more accepted? And at the same time, what were some of the obstacles and challenges in terms of integrating into the wider American culture?
Sure, I guess it's been an interesting journey because really Korean Americans didn't exist in great numbers before 1965. The Lyndon Johnson, well, the Immigration Act of 1965 kind of opened up from a quota-based visa to skills-based, and then that's the first wave of Koreans in 65, which my parents, both doctors, were part of. And so when I was born in the first generation, more or less, and they had 3 kids, 69, 70, and 71, and I can name 1,000 people 5 years younger than me born in the US, and I can't name 5 years older than me. So you really have a community that's pretty young, that's growing dramatically. I think we're the largest source of Koreans outside of Korea, and Los Angeles would be the largest city of Koreans outside of Korea, with a few 100,000 Korean Americans in a very large Koreatown. So I think in Los Angeles, which is the home to over 100 countries where that's the largest population of people outside the country, we're majority minority, and Koreans, I think, are very visible. Our K-town's large, our food's popular, and I think everything within Korea that Boyd had mentioned in terms of a cultural phenomenon, whether it's movies or K-pop, in addition to our great food, has really raised the profile of Koreans. So it's pretty mature. It's a little unusual as I look to the rest of the U.S. A lot of Korean Americans had a much more difficult time growing up, but in Los Angeles, I always felt tremendously proud to be Korean. I was surrounded by a ton of Korean friends. And because most people are minorities in Los Angeles, you know, quite comfortable. And that happens to be my experience. I know other people may have experienced other types of things, but I think Los Angeles is a pretty great place to grow up as an immigrant.
I mean, it's definitely known here for having what people claim a better Korean food than, you know, available in South Korea. So I've always wanted to go to Los Angeles. And
I think it's much better in Seoul, but it is excellent in LA.
Right. Well, John, so going forward, why is entrepreneurship so important? I mean, what role does it play in increasing positive social impact and also bridging gaps between ethnic communities? And in that regard, I mean, what are your next steps?
Well, I think entrepreneurs can do what a lot of sports teams do, which is it creates a system where a lot of people with very different talents, to be a center, we happen to be in the middle of the NBA Finals, so if you happen to be a center and 7 feet tall or a 6'2" point guard, you're bringing people with a lot of different talents, a lot of different backgrounds together against a common goal. And I think sports does that and entrepreneurship does that, where you have a lot of people with very different backgrounds working hand in hand together. And the only way to really combat ignorance is education. And there's no education like a direct relationship with someone. So if you don't know much about Persians, having a friend that's Persian, having a friend that's African American, have a friend that's Mexican American or Mexican or what have you, that's how you really understand culture. So I think small businesses and business in general, where we spend the majority of our waking hours in life, if they can become positive places of people working together, it de facto educates everyone and creates a better place. So I think it's critical that entrepreneurs, we have a vision and we turn it into reality, and we do that through teams. So companies don't win, teams do. And I think that will be a good building block of society. As for myself, I kind of retired in October. I've done this before. I don't know if this one's for good, but right now, if I start up something else, it'll be something that's fun. And I might even do some teaching and some coaching. I'm doing kind of a lot more investing in board membership and focusing on my family.
Well, it sounds like a lifetime's work. It doesn't sound like you're going to be retiring anytime soon, John. But, well, Bora, what are your next steps in this regard? I mean, what do you hope to achieve as local councillor and a politician of the Labour Party in the UK?
Oh, so if you'd asked me this question 6 months ago, I would have been, deep in a campaign for another set of elections, sort of London mayoral elections that I'm helping as a local activist, as a campaigner. Right now, I think we're, as a country, as a city, London, and as a region, Hammersmith, we're very much focused on the fight against COVID-19. So that's sort of where my efforts are. Sort of longer term, once we get through this, I would like to continue in local politics. I'm very passionate about the city. I grew up in London, but also the country that I'm living in, and I would love to see sort of closer integration between the UK and Korea. There's a lot of parallels between the two countries, despite the fact that they're obviously opposite sides of the world. And on a personal level, I would love to carry on in politics, see whether I could encourage more Koreans and East Asians to get involved, because, as I said, I think visibility is incredibly important, and I think sort of political education for people wanting to get involved, especially people like me that perhaps weren't interested or involved in politics at university or when they were younger. It would be good to sort of get the message out there that you can get involved at any age, for anyone who is interested in sort of issues locally or around the world.
Right, well, having grown up, having spent my childhood years in London, I think it was a proud moment for everyone, all Koreans in Britain, when you became the first local councillor in 2018.
Oh, thank you so much.
With your parents, of course, their business being at the heart of the Korean community there as well. So it's very meaningful for all of us. But, well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the discussion today. But thank you so much for joining us, Bora Kwan and John Suh, based in London and Los Angeles.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching. Tomorrow is a holiday in South Korea, so we will be back on Monday, Korea time. Until then, have a lovely weekend wherever you are. Goodbye.